The morning sky above New York City suddenly went dark. People stopped walking on the streets and looked up to see massive ships blocking out the sun. The alien vessels were bigger than any building, and their black metal surfaces reflected no light. Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Liberty, watching his radar screens fill with red dots. Each dot represented a ship larger than anything humans had ever built. Jake had spent 30 years in the Navy, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. His communications officer turned to him with wide eyes and said the aliens were sending a message. Jake nodded and told him to put it on the main screen. The bridge went quiet as an alien face appeared before them. The creature had blue skin and 4 eyes that glowed like stars. Its mouth opened to reveal rows of sharp teeth. The alien spoke in perfect English, which made Jake feel even more uncomfortable. It said its name was War Commander Thex of the Zephyrian Empire. Thex explained that his people had conquered 17 star systems, and now Earth would join their empire. The alien's voice was calm and cold, like he was reading a shopping list. He gave humanity 72 hours to surrender completely or face total destruction. Dr. Lisa Parker was in her laboratory when the broadcast began. She stopped her work on new metal alloys and watched the alien commander with growing fear. Thex began showing off Zephyrian technology to prove how hopeless human resistance would be. The alien soldiers wore armor that shimmered like water in the light. Thex called it the quantum shell matrix and claimed it had never been broken in 3,000 years of warfare. The alien demonstration showed their soldiers walking through explosions without taking any damage. Energy weapons bounced off the armor like light off a mirror. Kinetic weapons simply stopped in mid-air before reaching the soldiers. Thex smiled with his terrifying teeth and said human weapons were toys compared to Zephyrian technology. He ended the broadcast by saying resistance was pointless and surrender was the only way to avoid extinction. Colonel Rick Adams was at Fort Bragg when the message ended. He immediately began calling his officers and preparing for war. Rick had fought in every major conflict for the past 20 years, and he knew fear when he saw it. His soldiers were scared, but they were also angry. The aliens' arrogant tone had made it clear they saw humans as insects to be stepped on. Rick gathered his men and told them they would fight no matter what the odds were. President Williams called an emergency meeting of world leaders within hours of the broadcast. The room was filled with shouting and panic as each leader tried to understand what they were facing. Some wanted to surrender immediately, while others demanded they fight. General Kate Sullivan presented military assessments that painted a grim picture. Human weapons technology was centuries behind what the aliens possessed. Their ships could destroy entire cities from orbit, and their soldiers seemed invincible. Dr. Parker worked through the night analyzing every second of the alien broadcast. She recorded the energy signatures from their weapons and tried to understand how the quantum shell matrix worked. The armor seemed to respond to threats before they even arrived. It was like the alien technology could see into the future and prepare defenses automatically. Lisa had never seen anything like it in all her years studying materials science. Jake Morrison received orders to prepare Earth's defense fleet for battle. The human ships were powerful, but they looked like toys compared to the alien dreadnoughts. Jake knew his people would fight bravely, but he also knew they were facing an enemy that had never lost a battle. The Zephyrians had perfected warfare over thousands of years while humans were still learning to leave their own planet. Colonel Adams spent the day visiting military bases and talking to soldiers. He could see the fear in their eyes, but also determination. These men and women had families to protect and homes to defend. They would not give up without a fight, even if victory seemed impossible. Rick began planning defensive strategies and evacuation procedures for civilian populations. He knew the aliens would target military installations first. War Commander Thex stood on his command ship looking down at the blue and green planet below. Earth was beautiful, but its people were primitive. The Zephyrians had encountered dozens of species like humans during their expansion across the galaxy. None had been able to resist the Empire for more than a few days. Thex expected this conquest to be equally simple and quick. The alien commander reviewed intelligence reports about human military capabilities. Their weapons were crude metal projectiles and chemical explosives. They had no energy shields or quantum armor. Their fastest ships moved at a fraction of light speed, while Zephyrian vessels could cross star systems in hours. Thex was puzzled why the Empire had even bothered to offer surrender terms. This would not be a war, but a simple extermination. Dr. Parker finally went home after 18 hours in her laboratory. Her head was full of equations and theories about the alien armor, but she had no answers yet. The quantum shell matrix seemed to violate several laws of physics that she thought were absolute. Lisa looked at her sleeping daughter and wondered if there would be a world for her to grow up in. The aliens had given them less than 3 days to find a miracle. Jake Morrison stood alone on his ship's deck, watching the alien vessels in the distance. They had not moved since arriving, but their presence filled the sky like storm clouds. Radio chatter from around the world told stories of panic and chaos as people tried to flee the cities. Some countries were already talking about surrender, while others prepared for the worst fight in human history. The countdown had begun, and humanity had never faced anything like this before. The Zephyrians possessed technology that seemed like magic and armor that had never been defeated. Earth's defenders had brave hearts and stubborn spirits, but that might not be enough against an empire that had conquered the stars. The next 72 hours would determine if humanity would survive as a free species or become slaves to alien masters who saw them as nothing more than another primitive race to be controlled. The 72 hours passed quickly, and Earth's leaders had refused to surrender. War Commander Thex was not surprised by this decision, because primitive species often chose to fight before accepting the inevitable. He gave the order to begin the invasion and watched as his troop ships descended toward the planet's surface like falling stars. The first targets would be military installations where human resistance was strongest. Lieutenant Amy Walsh crouched behind concrete barriers at Edwards Air Force Base as alien ships landed in the distance. She could see Zephyrian soldiers emerging from their vessels and walking calmly across the open ground. Their armor caught the sunlight and seemed to glow with inner fire. Amy raised her rifle and aimed at the nearest alien, but her hands were shaking with fear and excitement. The Zephyrian soldiers moved with confidence that came from 3,000 years of victory. Their quantum shell matrix armor made them feel invincible as they approached the human defensive positions. Lieutenant Walsh opened fire along with dozens of other soldiers, but their bullets simply bounced off the alien armor like raindrops hitting glass. The Zephyrians did not even slow down or take cover because they knew human weapons could not hurt them. Dr. Lisa Parker watched the battle from her underground laboratory through security cameras. She recorded every detail of how the alien armor responded to different types of attacks. The quantum shell matrix seemed to analyze each incoming projectile and create the perfect defense automatically. Energy weapons were absorbed and redirected, while kinetic rounds were stopped completely before impact. It was like the armor could think and react faster than any human technology. War Commander Thex observed the battle from his command ship with growing satisfaction. His soldiers advanced steadily against fierce human resistance without taking a single casualty. The primitive metal projectiles fired by human weapons were no threat to Zephyrian technology. Thex had seen similar scenes on 16 other worlds during the Empire's expansion, and this battle was proceeding exactly as expected. Colonel Rick Adams coordinated the defense from his command bunker. As reports came in from battlefields around the world, every engagement told the same story of human weapons failing against alien armor. Railguns that could punch through tank armor had no effect on Zephyrian soldiers. Plasma rifles developed from the most advanced human technology were completely useless against the quantum shell matrix. Rick realized they were fighting an enemy that had already won before the battle began. The aliens moved through human defenses like ghosts, walking through walls. Lieutenant Walsh watched her fellow soldiers fall back as their weapons proved worthless against the invaders. The Zephyrians carried energy weapons that cut through human armor and concrete barriers with equal ease. Amy saw good soldiers die while the aliens remained untouched by everything thrown at them. The battle was becoming a massacre instead of a fight. Dr. Parker analyzed the energy signatures from the alien armor and began to understand how it worked. The quantum shell matrix created defensive fields based on predictions about incoming threats. It used complex algorithms to calculate the best response to each type of attack. The armor was so advanced that it could adapt to new weapons within seconds of first contact. Lisa realized that conventional military thinking would never defeat this technology. Thex broadcast another message to human forces as his soldiers continued their advance. He explained that resistance was pointless because Zephyrian armor had never been penetrated by any weapon in galactic history. The war commander seemed genuinely puzzled by human determination to keep fighting when defeat was certain. He offered one final chance for surrender before his forces would show no mercy to the defenders. Colonel Adams refused the alien offer and ordered his troops to keep fighting despite the hopeless situation. Human soldiers began using heavier weapons, including artillery and anti-tank missiles, but nothing could damage the Zephyrian armor. The aliens walked through explosions that would destroy buildings without showing any signs of injury. Adams realized that traditional military tactics were useless against this enemy. Lieutenant Walsh and her remaining soldiers retreated to the base's inner defenses as alien forces surrounded them. The Zephyrians moved slowly because they knew human weapons could not hurt them. Amy watched through her scope as alien soldiers ignored cover and walked in straight lines across open ground. Their confidence was absolute because their armor had made them gods of war who feared nothing. Dr. Parker worked frantically to find some weakness in the alien technology while battles raged across the planet. She studied every piece of data about the quantum shell matrix and how it responded to different attacks. The armor seemed perfect in every way, and Lisa began to wonder if humanity had any chance of survival. The aliens possessed technology that was so far beyond human understanding that resistance seemed impossible. The first day of invasion ended with Zephyrian forces controlling major military installations around the world. Human casualties were enormous while alien losses were zero. War Commander Thex was pleased with the progress but disappointed by continued human resistance. Most species surrendered after seeing the futility of fighting. Zephyrian armor, but humans seemed determined to die rather than submit. Colonel Adams received reports from surviving commanders that painted a picture of complete disaster. Human forces had been routed everywhere they encountered alien soldiers. The most advanced weapons on Earth were useless against Zephyrian technology. Rick knew that conventional warfare had failed and humanity needed a miracle to survive the next few days. Lieutenant Walsh and the survivors at Edwards Air Force Base prepared for their final stand as alien forces closed in around them. The Zephyrians had taken their time because they faced no real threat from human weapons. Amy loaded fresh ammunition into her rifle even though she knew it would not help. She would keep fighting until the end, because that was what soldiers did when their backs were against the wall. Dr. Parker stared at her computer screens filled with data about alien armor technology. Somewhere in all the numbers and energy signatures was the key to human survival, but she could not find it. The quantum shell matrix seemed to have no weaknesses, and Lisa began to fear that this would be humanity's final battle. The aliens had brought perfection to war, and humans had only courage to fight against it. Dr. Lisa Parker had not slept for 3 days as alien forces continued their advance across Earth. Her laboratory was filled with computer screens, showing energy patterns and defensive algorithms from the quantum shell matrix. Lisa had analyzed thousands of pieces of data, but the alien armor still seemed invincible. She was drinking her 10th cup of coffee when something in the numbers caught her attention. The quantum shell matrix operated by predicting incoming threats and creating perfect defenses automatically. Lisa realized that the armor's computer systems were incredibly sophisticated and could analyze any weapon within microseconds. The problem was that the aliens had designed their defenses to counter advanced galactic technology. Every algorithm was programmed to expect energy weapons and guided projectiles with electronic components. Captain Ben Rogers was a former Marine sniper who had volunteered to test new weapons against alien armor. He had spent 15 years in special forces and could hit targets at distances that seemed impossible. Ben was cleaning his hunting rifle in the underground bunker when Dr. Parker called him with an unusual request. She wanted him to try shooting Zephyrian soldiers with simple lead bullets instead of advanced military ammunition. Lisa explained her theory to Ben while they prepared for the test. The quantum shell matrix was programmed to defend against sophisticated threats, but it might ignore simple projectiles that seemed harmless. The alien armor expected plasma bolts and guided missiles, so it might not recognize basic metal bullets as weapons. Ben thought the idea sounded crazy, but he was willing to try anything that might help humanity survive. War Commander Thex stood on a hill overlooking the ruins of a human city that his forces had captured. Zephyrian soldiers patrolled the streets below without fear because human weapons could not touch them. Thex was pleased with the invasion's progress but puzzled by continued human resistance. Most intelligent species understood when they were defeated, but humans seemed willing to fight forever, even when victory was impossible. Captain Rogers positioned himself on a rooftop with a clear view of a Zephyrian patrol moving through the abandoned streets. His rifle was a simple hunting weapon with no electronic components or advanced targeting systems. The bullets were basic lead projectiles shaped by human hands instead of computer-controlled machines. Ben felt strange using such primitive equipment when the fate of humanity might depend on his next shot. Dr. Parker watched through binoculars from a safe distance as Ben prepared to fire. She had calculated the exact velocity and trajectory needed for her theory to work. The bullet had to move at a specific speed that would register as harmless debris instead of an active weapon. Lisa held her breath as Ben aimed at the nearest Zephyrian soldier and slowly squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked, and the bullet flew through the air at exactly the right speed. The quantum shell matrix detected the incoming projectile but classified it as natural debris instead of a weapon threat. The armor's defensive systems ignored the simple lead bullet which passed through the energy fields like they did not exist. The bullet struck the alien soldier in the chest and dropped him instantly to the ground. Ben could not believe what he had just seen through his rifle scope. The Zephyrian soldier lay motionless in the street while his companions stared in shock and confusion. Their invincible armor had been penetrated by a simple hunting rifle that humans had used for hundreds of years. Captain Rogers fired again and watched another alien fall as the lead bullet punched through the quantum shell matrix like it was made of paper. Dr. Parker felt her heart racing as she watched the impossible become reality. The most advanced armor in galactic history had been defeated by primitive human technology that aliens considered obsolete. Lisa immediately contacted Colonel Adams and General Sullivan to report the breakthrough. Humanity finally had a weapon that could hurt their invaders and turn the tide of the war. War Commander Thex received urgent reports from his patrol leaders about soldiers falling to unknown weapons. The reports made no sense because human technology could not penetrate Zephyrian armor. Thex ordered immediate investigation of the incidents while worrying that humans might have developed new weapons during the invasion. The idea that primitive projectiles could bypass the quantum shell matrix never occurred to him. Colonel Adams mobilized every available resource to mass-produce simple firearms and ammunition. Military factories that had been making advanced weapons switched to producing basic rifles and lead bullets. The key was keeping the projectiles primitive without any electronic components that might trigger the alien armor's defensive systems. Rick realized that humanity's salvation lay in embracing the past instead of the future. Captain Rogers continued testing different types of simple weapons against Zephyrian patrols. Bolt-action rifles worked perfectly, as did pump-action shotguns loaded with basic pellets. Even crossbows and slingshots could penetrate the alien armor if they fired projectiles at the right velocity. Ben felt like he was fighting a war with museum pieces, but these ancient weapons were more effective than anything in the modern military arsenal. Dr. Parker worked with weapons manufacturers to design ammunition that would consistently fool the quantum shell matrix. The bullets had to be made from specific metal alloys and shaped by traditional methods instead of computer-controlled machines. Any trace of advanced technology would make the armor recognize them as threats. Lisa supervised production lines that looked like they belonged in the 19th century instead of the modern world. The news of the breakthrough spread through human resistance networks around the globe. Soldiers who had been retreating in despair suddenly found new hope as word came that alien armor could be defeated. Weapons factories converted their production lines while soldiers prepared for counterattacks using rifles their grandfathers would have recognized. The most advanced war in human history would be fought with deliberately primitive weapons. General Sullivan coordinated distribution of the new weapons to surviving military units worldwide. The simple rifles and ammunition were much easier to produce than advanced military equipment. Kate realized that humanity's greatest advantage was the ability to think differently about old problems. The aliens had expected humans to fight with sophisticated technology, but Earth's defenders would use simplicity as their weapon. War Commander Thex still could not understand how his soldiers were dying from human attacks. The reports described primitive metal projectiles that should have been harmless against Zephyrian armor. Thex ordered his scientists to analyze the incidents, but they were equally puzzled by the impossible results. The quantum shell matrix had never failed before, and the aliens could not accept that their perfection had been defeated by human primitiveness. Word spread through human resistance networks faster than wildfire, as soldiers learned that simple bullets could penetrate alien armor. Sergeant Danny Clark received his new weapon in the ruins of Chicago, where Zephyrian forces had established a command post. The rifle felt strange in his hands because it looked like something from a history museum instead of a modern battlefield. Danny had fought with advanced weapons his entire career, but now humanity's survival depended on deliberately primitive technology. Major Ashley Davis coordinated strikes against Zephyrian positions using teams armed with bolt-action rifles and pump-action shotguns. The aliens had grown careless during their easy conquest and no longer bothered with defensive tactics. Ashley watched through binoculars as her soldiers moved into position around an alien patrol. The Zephyrians walked in straight lines across open ground because they believed human weapons could not hurt them. War Commander Thex stood in his command center trying to understand the disturbing reports from his field commanders. Zephyrian soldiers were dying from what appeared to be primitive projectile weapons, but that should have been impossible. The quantum shell matrix had been tested against every known type of ammunition in galactic history. Thex ordered his scientists to conduct immediate analysis of the human weapons, but their initial findings made no sense. Sergeant Clark led his squad through the bombed-out streets of downtown Chicago as they approached their target. The Zephyrian command post was housed in what used to be a major hotel before the invasion began. Alien soldiers patrolled the perimeter, with the casual confidence that came from believing they were invincible. Danny could see at least 20 enemies between his position and the objective, but he was no longer afraid of their armor. The first shot came from a rooftop sniper who dropped a Zephyrian guard with a single bullet to the head. The alien fell silently while his companions looked around in confusion. They could not understand how their comrade had died because they saw no energy weapons or missile trails. Major Davis watched as panic began to spread through alien ranks. For the first time since the invasion started, Dr. Lisa Parker worked around the clock to refine the ammunition specifications and ensure maximum effectiveness against alien armor. She discovered that even ancient weapons like crossbows and slingshots could penetrate the quantum shell matrix if they fired projectiles at specific velocities. The alien armor was programmed to ignore anything that moved too slowly to be a modern weapon. Lisa realized that humanity's supposed technological inferiority had become their greatest advantage. Zephyrian soldiers began falling all around. The Chicago command post as human snipers picked them off with hunting rifles. The aliens tried to return fire with their energy weapons, but they could not see their attackers who were hidden in ruined buildings. Sergeant Clark coordinated the assault through hand signals because radio communications might alert the alien armor to their presence. The battle felt like something from an old war movie instead of a fight for human survival. War Commander Thex received urgent requests for reinforcements from commanders across the planet. Zephyrian forces that had been advancing steadily were now under attack from mysterious human weapons. The reports described soldiers dying from projectiles that should have been harmless against their armor. Thex was beginning to feel something he had never experienced before in 3,000 years of conquest. The mighty Zephyrian commander was starting to feel afraid. Major Davis led the final assault on the alien command post as resistance crumbled around the building. Her soldiers carried weapons that looked like antiques, but they were more effective than anything in the modern military arsenal. Ashley watched Zephyrian soldiers retreat for the first time since the invasion began. The aliens, who had seemed like gods of war, were running away from humans armed with simple rifles and shotguns. Colonel Rick Adams received reports of successful attacks on alien positions around the world. Human forces were finally winning battles against their invaders using weapons that belonged in museums. Rick coordinated massive counteroffensives as factories worked overtime to produce simple firearms and ammunition. The most advanced war in human history was being won with deliberately primitive technology that the aliens could not understand. The Zephyrian scientists finally discovered why human weapons were penetrating their armor. The quantum shell matrix was programmed to defend against sophisticated galactic technology, but it ignored simple projectiles that moved at subsonic velocities. The armor classified basic bullets as harmless debris instead of weapons threats. War Commander Thex realized that his people's greatest strength had become their fatal weakness. Sergeant Clark and his squad secured the Chicago command post after the last Zephyrian defenders fled in panic. The aliens had abandoned advanced equipment and tactical positions because their invincible armor had failed them. Danny looked at the primitive rifle in his hands and marveled at how humanity's oldest weapons had defeated the most advanced armor in the galaxy. Sometimes the best solutions were also the simplest ones. General Kate Sullivan coordinated global counteroffensives as human forces went on the attack for the first time since the invasion began. Factories that had been producing advanced weapons switched to making basic rifles and lead bullets. Kate realized that humanity's survival depended on embracing their technological past instead of their future. The aliens had expected humans to fight with sophisticated equipment, but Earth's defenders would use simplicity as their weapon. War Commander Thex watched his conquest crumble as reports came in of defeats across the planet. Zephyrian forces were retreating to their ships because their armor could no longer protect them from human weapons. Thex had never experienced failure before, and he could not accept that primitive projectiles had defeated 3,000 years of technological advancement. The proud alien commander was learning that perfection could become a prison when facing an enemy who thought differently. Dr. Parker continued refining the anti-armor ammunition while celebrating humanity's first victories against the invaders. She had discovered that the aliens' sophistication was also their blindness, because they could not imagine threats from primitive sources. Lisa watched production lines making bullets by hand instead of computer-controlled machines. The manufacturing process looked ancient, but it was producing the most effective weapons ever used against galactic technology. Major Davis prepared for the next phase of counterattacks as human forces regained momentum across the battlefield. The aliens were no longer advancing with confidence because they knew human weapons could kill them. Ashley coordinated strikes against Zephyrian ships and supply lines, using soldiers armed with hunting rifles and shotguns. The tide of war was turning because humanity had learned to fight smarter instead of harder against their technologically superior enemies. The final battle for Earth began as human forces surrounded the main Zephyrian command ship that had landed outside Washington, D.C. Colonel Rick Adams led a combined force of infantry and armor, but their weapons were deliberately primitive instead of advanced. Tank cannons fired solid metal shells while soldiers carried bolt-action rifles that their grandfathers would have recognized. The sight looked like something from an old war, but these ancient weapons were humanity's key to victory. War Commander Thex stood on his ship's bridge, watching human forces approach his position. For the first time in 3,000 years of conquest, he felt real fear, because his invincible armor had failed him. The Zephyrian soldiers around him were demoralized and confused because their greatest advantage had become worthless against human ingenuity. Thex could not understand how primitive projectiles had defeated the most advanced technology in galactic history. Dr. Lisa Parker worked in her laboratory making final adjustments to the anti-armor ammunition while the battle raged outside. She had discovered that simple lead bullets fired at specific velocities could penetrate any Zephyrian defense. The alien armor was too sophisticated for its own good because it ignored threats that seemed too primitive to be dangerous. Lisa realized that humanity had won by refusing to fight the war their enemies expected. Officer Tony Garcia was a security guard at the research facility who had been issued a simple revolver for protection. He was making his rounds when alarms sounded throughout the building. Tony looked through a window and saw a group of Zephyrian soldiers approaching the main entrance. Their armor gleamed in the sunlight, but Tony was no longer impressed by alien technology. He checked his weapon and prepared to defend the laboratory that had saved humanity. The Zephyrian assault team moved toward Dr. Parker's facility with desperate determination. War Commander Thex had ordered them to capture or destroy the human scientist who had discovered their armor's weakness. The aliens still could not believe that their perfect defenses had been defeated by primitive weapons, but they had learned to fear human bullets. These soldiers wore the most advanced armor in the galaxy, but they moved with the caution of troops who knew they could die. Colonel Adams coordinated the final assault on the alien command ship as human forces closed in from all directions. His soldiers carried weapons that looked like museum pieces, but they were more effective than anything in the modern military arsenal. Rick watched through binoculars as Zephyrian defenders retreated toward their ship because their armor could no longer protect them. The aliens who had seemed invincible were now running from humans armed with simple rifles. Officer Garcia confronted the Zephyrian assault team at the laboratory entrance with only his service revolver for protection. The aliens raised their energy weapons, but Tony was faster, because he had trained with firearms his entire career. The security guard fired 6 shots from his simple revolver and watched all 6 aliens fall to the ground. War Commander Thex himself was among the dead, because even the mightiest alien commander could not survive basic human bullets. Dr. Parker heard the gunshots outside her laboratory and realized that someone had saved her life. She looked through the window and saw Officer Garcia standing over dead Zephyrian soldiers with a smoking revolver in his hand. Lisa felt amazed that the alien commander who had threatened to destroy humanity had been killed by a simple security guard with a basic handgun. Sometimes the most important battles were won by ordinary people with simple tools. The Zephyrian command ship began lifting off as human forces overran the alien positions around it. The surviving aliens were retreating to space because their conquest had failed completely. Admiral Jake Morrison received surrender requests from alien fleet commanders, who no longer wanted to fight against human weapons. The mighty Zephyrian Empire was abandoning Earth because they could not defeat primitive projectiles fired by determined humans. Colonel Adams watched the alien ships disappear into the sky and felt pride in what humanity had accomplished. They had faced extinction against technologically superior enemies, but survived through creativity and determination. The war had been won not with advanced weapons, but with simple tools used by clever people who refused to accept defeat. Rick realized that humans had discovered something more valuable than alien technology during the battle for their survival. General Kate Sullivan broadcast a message to the retreating Zephyrian fleet warning them never to return to Earth. She explained that humanity would defend itself against any future attacks using whatever methods proved most effective. Kate wanted the aliens to understand that humans were not primitive savages, but creative survivors who could adapt to any challenge. The message carried an implicit threat that Earth's defenders would always find ways to fight back against aggression. Dr. Parker stood outside her laboratory looking at the bodies of alien soldiers who had been killed by simple bullets. She thought about how the Zephyrians had conquered 17 star systems with their perfect armor, but failed on Earth because they could not imagine threats from primitive sources. Lisa realized that the aliens' greatest strength had become their fatal weakness when facing enemies who thought differently about old problems. The cleanup began as human forces secured alien equipment and technology, left behind by the retreating invaders. Scientists would study Zephyrian devices for years, but they had already learned the most important lesson. Advanced technology was not always better than simple solutions when facing complex problems. Humanity had saved itself by embracing primitive weapons that their enemies considered harmless and obsolete. Children played in the rebuilt cities using toy guns that fired foam darts while their parents worked to repair the damage from the invasion. The kids did not realize they were copying the weapons that had saved their world from alien conquest. Schools would teach future generations about the war when primitive bullets defeated perfect armor, because creativity was more powerful than technology alone. Admiral Morrison sent reports to world leaders explaining how the victory had been achieved. Through human ingenuity instead of superior firepower, the aliens had expected Earth's defenders to fight with sophisticated weapons, but humanity had won by using simple tools in unexpected ways. Jake knew that other alien empires would hear about Earth's victory and think twice before attacking a species that could turn weaknesses into strengths. Dr. Parker wrote her final report about the quantum shell matrix and how it had been defeated by basic projectiles that the armor ignored as harmless. She explained that the aliens had created perfect defenses against galactic technology, but failed to consider threats from primitive sources. Lisa concluded that humanity's greatest advantage was the willingness to think outside the box when facing impossible challenges. The last Zephyrian ship disappeared beyond Earth's atmosphere as the invasion officially ended in complete failure. War Commander Thex was dead, and his empire had learned that no armor was truly perfect when facing creative enemies. Humanity looked to the stars with new confidence, knowing that their survival depended not on copying alien technology, but on using human creativity to solve problems in unexpected ways. The universe had discovered that sometimes the oldest solutions were also the best ones.